I can already make a list of terms that we may need to review. Normal, natural. I mean, maybe we need to discuss what they mean, or what are the ways, plural, we can understand and challenge these ideas. And keeping this exercise of expanding horizons, I think Dr. Luiza Prado will introduce us to an even bigger one. The other day, I was peer reviewing an article that defined reproduction as the work of sustaining other lives. And I believe, Luiza, you will tell us that this means sustaining other human and non-human lives as well. So please join us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for your interest in this topic. Thank you, Ana Cristina, the other speakers, Pandora. So today, I wanted to tell a story, actually, and it's a story of a plant. It's been this plant has been kind of my obsession over the past, at this point, year and a half, and the main topic of my artistic practice. It's a plant called silphium. So now let's go back, let's say 2000 years. This story starts, according to many myths, in what today would be Libya in North Africa, close to what today is the city of Shahat. At that time and at that place, there was an ancient city called Cyrene. And prior to the founding of Cyrene, it is said that the garden of the Hesperides, the goddesses of the half-light, of the in-between, in that garden, one day, a black rain came down from the sky. And after that rain drenched the earth, a plant sprouted, silphium. That plant sprouted in this mythical garden, the same garden where actually Hercules did his 11th labor, the garden where the golden apple was. And this plant grew in this mythical garden, a plant that was for Cyrene after that city was founded by Greek settlers. It became one of the main symbols of that city. So this plant, according to Theophrastus, all of the usual kind of Greco-Roman writers wrote about this plant. Theophrastus, in his Enquiry into Plants, describes it as, the silphium has a great deal of thick root. Its stalk is like ferula in size and is nearly as thick. The leaf, which they call maspeton, is like celery. It has a broad fruit, which is leaf-like, as it were, and is called a phyllon. The stalk lasts only a year, like that of ferula. Another quite well-known Greco-Roman writer, Marcus Gavius Apicius, in his Res de Coquinaria, which is an ancient cookbook of Greek-Roman recipes, described the use of silphium in multiple dishes of the time as a spice for meats in classic dishes such as Parthian chicken, as well as in preparations and sauces for truffles and gourds. Silphium was so valued in the city of Cyrene that it became quite literally currency. The coins of the city were minted with the image of silphium. This coin, by the way, is currently part of the collection of the British Museum. Of course. I have made a 3D printed reproduction of this coin that I will pass around in a little bit. So this plant, so let's kind of look at the story that I've told you up until now. This is a plant growing in land that was occupied, right? Occupied by the Roman Empire. It was growing in land that was already quite arid. And it's a biological species, a being that became quite literally currency. So that to me is a really interesting cocktail because it allows us to look into what's going on now too. I feel that it's a story that speaks to very contemporary issues, even though it's 2,000 years old. This plant was the subject of much dispute. At one point, it was literally worth its weight in gold, and it was kept in the financial reserves of the Roman Empire, along with gold and silver. This plant grew in enclosures that were owned in privatized land, owned by Roman landlords, and ended up being the subject of what today we would call eco-terrorism, where local farmers would get into those lands owned by these Roman landlords and destroy things as protest, as resistance to the colonial occupation of that place by Rome. This plant, very interestingly to me, was also part of the media of its time. This is, so Aristophanes wrote a play called The Birds. It's quite a famous play. And there's a very, I find it hilarious. There's a scene in this play where a character is cooking a silphium sauce. And this sauce is so important to him that when 3 gods appear in his kitchen, he just sort of like ignores them. And he dismisses them completely because he's too focused on the sauce. Now, what made this plant so interesting and so valued? I mean, clearly it is a spice, right? But it is also an aphrodisiac and a contraceptive, which is incredibly convenient. You know, it's got everything you need. You can also eat it. So make it a meal, make it a nice dinner. And I find that story so interesting. And, you know, when I talk about this plant appearing in the media of its time and being so legendary, there's a love poem by Catullus that I really love also. It's a poem that he wrote for his married mistress, Lesbia, where he says, "You ask how many kisses of yours, Lesbia, would be enough and more for me. As great as the number of Libyan sands that lie at Cyrene producing silphium." So, you know, until we have silphium to kind of help us, then we can be together, baby. So the thing is, humans mess things up. And with a plant that was worth its weight in gold, seen in that way, understood in that way, that means, no, not yet, that one. I'm gonna make you hold on to the story a little bit longer. What happened is that this plant started being overharvested. Also, around the same time, the temperatures around that area of the Mediterranean, which I mentioned was already quite arid, rose. So the climate changed. And with that, also the plant disappeared. And that's 2,000 years ago. When Pliny the Elder wrote about this plant, he already wrote about it as something of the past. And when I first came across this plant, I was doing my PhD at the University of the Arts in Berlin. And in my work, I've been for now many years looking into articulations between strategies and technologies related to reproductive justice. And well, at the time during my PhD, I was interested in how the control over these technologies is a fundamental feature of colonial structures of power. For these structures to maintain themselves and perpetuate themselves, it is fundamental that they're able to control who gets to have children, how, where, in what conditions. And I was looking into stuff like the birth control pill, the IUD, the ways that these technologies were developed. But after I finished, I decided to shift my focus a little bit. At the time, I was, I feel, identifying a problem, which is an important part of research. But what I realized on both like an intellectual level and also on a very personal level was that it is impossible to only focus on the issue without also asking yourself, okay, what is the next step? Because this is something that we have to deal with. Because I feel that often, and again, I think this is a reflection that is both intellectual and very personal. I think when we're talking about feminisms, when we're talking about anti-colonial struggles, we're talking about histories of really profound violences, really like far-reaching forms of violence. And when we do that, of course, there is pain that comes with it. But we need to be able to also build something else. We need to be able to look ahead and think, okay, how do we step forward? How do we create something else that is not this? We know we don't want this. So what else do we do? And that to me was something that plants allowed me to do, because they opened up this whole landscape, and sorry for the pun, but this whole landscape of different forms of caring for one another. And of course, the story of a plant that disappears is a sad story. It's a story of loss and grief. It's a story of a planet that is changing, right? And I kept that story in the back burner because I thought this is really beautiful, but I need to kind of step into the future, you know, find ways to move forward. But then, and this is the plot twist, in 2021, a group of researchers from Istanbul University published a paper saying, we think we found this plant. And that blew my mind because it changes the narrative. It's a narrative that initially is of so much destruction, a narrative that is about greed, right? A dance, like this dance of greed, where, you know, I was looking at that and I was thinking, you know, how these colonizing forces, how much destruction they cause, destruction that is far-reaching, that reaches humans, but it also reaches landscapes, other beings, beings that we consider living, such as plants, or beings that Western thinking understands as not living, such as rocks and different features of a landscape, a mountain, a river. But if that plant can come back, that flips things. And that's when I started, you know, I've told you, I've been obsessed with this plant for like a year and a half now or so. And that's when I was like, okay, no, I need to do several projects around this. And this is what I've been working on for the past year and a half. So to give you a little bit more of a background on this plant, these researchers, they found this plant in central Turkey, at the foot of Mount Hassan in central Anatolia. And according to them, their theory is that this plant was probably brought in the form of seeds with waves of migration. And it's a plant that doesn't quite take everywhere. It's kind of fussy. I love that for her. Be fussy, yes. It's kind of fussy, but apparently it found a place where it could grow. And that to me, when I got the invitation to speak here, that to me spoke of a different kind of narrative of gestation. Imagine a plant laying low for 2,000 years, 2 millennia, and then, and that's my belief, allowing itself to be found again, allowing itself to engage with humanity again. That plant that supposedly came down from the sky with a black rain, and that went through all of that, went through a change in climate, went through land disputes, and now it's back. So over the past, this is me like trying to feed descriptions from Pliny the Elder to an AI system to see what comes out in terms of like what this system will interpret this plant as looking like. So there's a couple of images. This is kind of the first steps that I was taking in this research, trying to see how it could be reimagined by algorithms. And in a way, trying to reinsert also this plant into kind of the algorithmic circulation system. I mentioned that I also work a lot with food. So, and I've also been working with plants throughout my artistic career. So I'm interested in these relationships between like plants related to reproductive justice and colonial structures of power, and how do we create forms of care and caring for one another. And this was a dinner that I hosted last year, trying to think of the landscapes where this plant grew. And my question to myself was, how do I cook with an ingredient that I cannot access? Because this plant is still very rare and it grows in like 3 orchards in central Turkey. So it's not widely available yet. So these are some of the experiments that I was doing last year. And I included specifically the Instagram stories that people posted, because again, I'm trying to reinsert this plant into the ways that we circulate knowledge and data and images. So this is one of the coins that I will circulate here in a little bit when I finish. And I served also this plant on top of these 2 like very long 3-meter long paintings, where I imagine kind of the mythical aspects of this plant. So thank you. And I'll give you the coins now.